The winter of 1947 buried Britain alive. Snow fell without stopping for 7 weeks. Drifts climbed past the windows of farmhouses in Derbyshire. Trains froze on the tracks. Power lines came down across entire counties. And the electricity grid, still fragile from the war, failed in ways that left millions of homes dark and silent in the coldest temperatures recorded in a century. And almost everyone survived. Not because of emergency services, not because of government intervention, which was catastrophically slow. They survived because the woman standing at the kitchen range in nearly every home in this country knew things about cold that we have entirely, completely, and dangerously forgotten. She knew how to block a chimney with a rolled-up football bladder. She knew how to turn yesterday's bread into a medical compress. She knew how to keep a fire alive for 5 months straight without it ever going fully out. She knew 25 things that kept her family warm, fed, and breathing through winters that would put most of us in hospital today. Over the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through every single one of those secrets, not as nostalgia, but as knowledge. Because here is the part of this story that should genuinely alarm you. When the beast from the east hit in 2018 and 3 inches of snow shut down half the country, people panicked because Tesco ran out of bread. 3 inches. Your grandmother survived 7 weeks of it with a coal range, a bag of salt, and the kind of competence we have somehow decided we no longer need. But there is something deeper going on here, something about the way these tricks connected to each other that almost nobody has ever explained properly. And once you see it, you will never look at a thermostat the same way again. Let us start with the house itself. Because before your grandmother could keep anyone warm, she had to stop the cold from getting in. And the cold was everywhere. Number 25. Newspaper wall insulation. Before cavity wall insulation existed, before the phrase even meant anything, your grandmother had already solved the problem. She pasted sheets of the Daily Mirror behind every wardrobe, inside every cupboard back, along the skirting boards of every outside wall. Layer after layer, smoothed flat with a pot of flour paste and a brush. The trapped air between those layers of newsprint created genuine, measurable insulation. A newspaper cost a penny in the 1940s. By the time she had lined the back bedroom, she had spent less than 6 pence and raised the room temperature by several degrees. Some families layered it under the carpets and the lino, too. A buffer between ice-cold flagstone and bare feet first thing in the morning. The Ministry of Information actually recommended this during the war. You could hear the paper rustling behind the furniture when the wind picked up outside. That rustling was not a sign of a drafty house. It was a sign the insulation was working. Modern homeowners spend thousands on cavity wall filling. Your grandmother did it with last week's news and a pot of paste. If your family did this, if you remember the sound of newspaper rustling behind the wardrobe, tell me in the comments. I want to know how far across the country this reached. Number 24. The chimney balloon. Every terraced house had a fireplace in nearly every room, and every fireplace that was not in use became a wind tunnel sucking warmth straight out of the house. Your grandfather solved this with a tightly packed ball of newspaper or old rags, jammed into the chimney just above the damper. Some families used an inflated rubber bladder, even a football bladder wedged into the flue, until it sealed tight. The draft stopped dead. A room that had been leaking heat all day suddenly held warmth for hours. The trick, of course, was remembering to remove it before lighting a fire. More than one family forgot and filled the front room with thick black smoke, but those who remembered saved shillings every week on coal. And in the 1950s, when coal cost around £2 a ton, and a family might burn a ton a month through winter, blocking unused chimneys was not a handy tip. It was survival arithmetic. Number 23. Blackout curtain layering. During the war, every window had to be covered with dense blackout material, thick, heavy fabric, sometimes rubberized on one side. When the war ended, most women were told to throw them away. Your grandmother, did not throw away anything that worked. She hung those blackout curtains behind her regular curtains as a second layer. The gap between the two created an air pocket, a thermal barrier between the frozen glass and the room. Some families added a third layer, a net curtain closest to the window, creating two separate insulating air gaps. The difference on a January night was remarkable. Rooms stayed warm for hours after the fire burned low. When lined curtains appeared in the shops during the 1960s, the old blackout layers were finally discarded. But the principal multiple layers with trapped air between them is exactly what thermal curtains sold today for £40 a pair are designed to replicate. Number 22. Hessian draft excluders. Every external door in a 1950s terrace had a gap at the bottom wide enough to post a letter through. Your grandmother sewed a long sausage of old Hessian sacking, stuffed it tight with sawdust or sand or old stockings, and pressed it against the base of every door that led outside. The weight of the filling held it in place. No fastening needed. You could feel the difference the moment it went down. That thin whistle of cold air around your ankles stopped. The fire did not have to fight so hard. She made these from materials that cost nothing. Sacking from the greengrocer, sawdust from the joiner on the corner, sand from the builder's yard. We buy foam draft strips now from B&Q for £8 a roll. They peel off after one season. Her Hessian excluders lasted a decade. Okay, I need to settle something. Which was the bigger draft problem in your childhood home? The gap under the front door or the letterbox? Because I have heard passionate arguments on both sides, and I want this settled once and for all. Comments. Now here is where things shift from the house to the body. Because keeping the building warm was only half the battle. Your grandmother also had an entire medicine cabinet's worth of winter remedies that cost almost nothing. And some of them, this is the part that surprised me, have been quietly validated by modern science. Number 21. The bread poultice. When a child came down with a rattling winter chest cold, your grandmother did not reach for cough syrup. She reached for the bread bin. A bread poultice was made by soaking thick slices of stale bread in boiling water, wrapping the hot, soggy mass in a muslin cloth, and laying it flat on the child's chest. The moist heat penetrated deep, loosening congestion and easing breathing within minutes. The bread held warmth far longer than a hot water bottle, sometimes 30 minutes or more, before it needed replacing. Some grandmothers smeared goose fat on the skin first, believing it helped the heat penetrate further. A loaf cost about 9 pence in 1953. The poultice used bread that had already gone, stale bread that would otherwise have been wasted. Doctors in the 1940s actually prescribed this alongside aspirin. Modern physiotherapy clinics now charge £50 a session for moist heat therapy. Your grandmother did it for free, with yesterday's loaf and a square of muslin. Number 20. Camphorated oil chest rub. Before Vicks VapoRub became a household name, every chemist in Britain stocked small brown bottles of camphorated oil at about 6 pence each. Your grandmother would warm the oil between her palms and rub it firmly across the chest and back of any child with a winter cough. Then she would cover the skin with a square of flannel, pin it to the vest so it stayed in place, and send the child to bed. The camphor vapors rose gently through the night, clearing the airways and soothing the cough hour after hour. Some grandmothers added a few drops of eucalyptus oil to sharpen the effect. The flannel square was not optional. It held the warmth against the skin, stopped the oil soaking into the sheets, and created a warm compress that lasted until morning. The smell of camphor meant winter. If you grew up with that smell, if closing your eyes right now brings it back, you are nodding your head and I know it. Number 19. Onion syrup for coughs. At the first sound of a winter cough, your grandmother sliced a large onion into thick rings, layered them in a bowl with a heavy sprinkling of sugar, covered it with a plate, and left it on the side overnight. By morning, the sugar had drawn all the juice from the onion, creating a thin amber syrup pooled at the bottom of the bowl. A teaspoon every few hours soothed sore throats and calmed coughs that kept the house awake. The taste was powerful, sweet, and sharp at the same time, and children swallowed it with a shudder and an immediate glass of water. An onion cost a penny. The sugar was already in the cupboard. The remedy was free and could be made fresh every night through the worst of winter. For decades, this was dismissed as folk nonsense. Then researchers discovered that onions contain quercetin, a compound with genuine anti-inflammatory properties now being studied in clinical trials. Your grandmother did not know the word quercetin. She just knew the syrup worked because her mother told her, and her mother before that. Number 18. Elderberry syrup. Every autumn, your grandmother walked the hedgerows and picked elderberries by the punnet, brought them home, and simmered them slowly with sugar and cloves until the liquid reduced into a thick, almost black syrup. She bottled it, labeled it with the year, and stored it in the back of the pantry. At the first sign of a cold, the first sniff, the first scratchy throat, every member of the family got a tablespoon. Children grimaced. Adults stirred it into hot water with lemon and drank it like tea. That syrup was the household's front line from November through March. A pound of elderberries cost nothing. They grew in every hedgerow in the country. Sugar was 6 pence a pound. One batch lasted the whole season. And this is the detail that genuinely blew my mind when I was researching this. In 2019, researchers reviewed multiple clinical studies and found that elderberry supplementation significantly reduced both the duration and severity of upper respiratory infections. Published in a peer-reviewed medical journal, your grandmother's hedgerow medicine, the syrup the family doctor smiled at politely and said could not hurt, was backed by real science the entire time. We just never thought to check. If your grandmother made elderberry syrup, or sloe gin, or rosehip syrup, or any hedgerow remedy, tell me what it was and where she picked the berries. I think we can map the hedgerow pharmacy of Britain from the comments section alone. Now let me take you into one specific kitchen, because this is the part of the story that people always skip: the actual daily reality of what a winter evening looked and sounded and smelled like. Number 17. The warming shelf above the range. That cast iron range in your grandmother's kitchen did far more than cook food. It heated the entire house. But the cleverest feature, the one that people who never lived with a range never knew about, was the warming shelf. A metal ledge above the hot plate where your grandmother placed boots, socks, mittens, and school shirts overnight. By morning, everything was bone dry and warm to the touch. Children pulled on heated socks before walking to school in the dark. Fathers stepped into warm boots before the 6 o'clock shift. That shelf ran on nothing but residual heat from the banked fire. It cost nothing extra. The smell of warm wool and drying leather was the smell of a British winter morning. When central heating and tumble dryers arrived in the 1970s, the warming shelf disappeared from British life overnight. But it solved a problem that still exists: cold, damp clothes on a freezing morning better than anything we have replaced it with. Number 16. Overnight porridge on the range. On the coldest mornings, your grandmother's porridge was already waiting when the family came downstairs at 6:30. She had put the oats and water in a heavy iron pot on the cooling range the night before, letting them cook slowly on residual heat through the darkness. By morning, the porridge was thick, creamy, and hot, without anyone having to tend it. A pound of oats cost about 5 pence in the 1950s, and fed a family of 5 for most of the week. That slow overnight cooking broke the oats down completely, producing a smoother, more digestible porridge than anything a microwave can manage today. Children ate it with golden syrup or with a pinch of salt, depending on whether the family was English or Scottish. That argument has not been settled in over 100 years, and I am not foolish enough to try. But I do want to know: syrup or salt? because the comment section is about to become a war zone and I am here for it. Let me tell you about a woman named Edith Bransby. In 1947, that same winter I mentioned at the start, the one that buried the country for 7 weeks, Edith was living in a 2-up, 2-down terraced house in Barnsley, South Yorkshire, with her husband Arthur, who worked at Barrow Colliery, and their 4 children, the youngest just 18 months old. When the snow began on January 22nd, Arthur left for his shift as normal. He did not come home for 3 days because the roads were impassable, and the miners were kept at the pit to maintain the pumps. Edith was alone with 4 children, a coal range, and whatever was in the house. She banked the kitchen fire every night with a precision that kept the embers alive until morning. She blocked the chimney in the front room with a rolled-up horse blanket. She lined the children's cots with newspaper beneath the mattresses and heated bricks on the hearth, wrapping them in flannel and placing them at the foot of each bed. She made bread poultices for the baby when he developed a chest cold on the 2nd week. She kept a pot of porridge on the range every night. She made onion syrup on the kitchen table. She sent the oldest boy, who was 9, to knock on Mrs. Greenwood next door every morning and evening to check she was breathing, because Mrs. Greenwood was 78 and lived alone. When the thaw finally came, a reporter from the Barnsley Chronicle visited the street. He found that every family had survived. Not one child had been hospitalized. Not one elderly resident had died of cold. The reporter noted that the women of the terrace had organized a system, sharing coal, sharing bread, checking on each other twice a day, pooling whatever the milkman managed to deliver when he could get through. Edith Bransby was never interviewed. She was never named in the article. She was just one of thousands of women across Britain who kept their families alive through the worst winter in modern memory, using nothing but knowledge, resourcefulness, and a kind of quiet, relentless competence that has no modern equivalent. If you had a grandmother like Edith, and I suspect nearly everyone watching this did, this is the part where you might need to pause for a moment. Take your time. Number 15. The brick bed warmer. Hot water bottles leaked. Stone bottles cracked. But a common house brick wrapped in flannel lasted forever. Your grandmother placed an ordinary clay brick on the hearth beside the fire for an hour before bedtime. Once heated through, she wrapped it in old flannel. Some families had a dedicated cloth sleeve sewn to fit and slid it between the sheets at the foot of the bed. That brick radiated gentle, even warmth for hours, far longer than a hot water bottle. The thermal mass of clay held heat steadily. It never scorched. It never cooled too suddenly. Children curled their feet around it under the blankets and fell asleep to its slow, deep warmth. A brick cost nothing. Every house had one spare somewhere. When rubber hot water bottles became cheap in the 1960s, the bed brick vanished overnight. But I will say this, nothing else quite matches the feel of a warm brick through flannel. If you remember it, you know exactly what I mean. Number 14. The mustard foot bath. When someone came through the door, soaked and shivering, the first thing your grandmother did before they even took off their coat was fill a basin with water, as hot as they could stand, and stir in a tablespoon of mustard powder. Feet went in immediately. The mustard created a fierce warming sensation that drew blood to the extremities, restoring circulation and raising core body temperature faster than sitting by the fire for an hour. Coleman's mustard powder cost about 4p a tin in the 1950s and lasted months. The ritual was non-negotiable. You sat with your feet in that basin until your cheeks turned pink and your fingers stopped trembling. Nobody argued with it. Nobody asked if it worked. It worked. You could feel it working. Some families added a pinch of ginger powder. Some added a splash of vinegar. Every house had its own variation. What did yours add? I have heard mustard, ginger, salt, and one person swore their grandmother used cayenne pepper, which I find both impressive and terrifying. Number 13. Goose fat, the everything solution. Every November, when the Christmas bird was roasted, your grandmother carefully drained the fat into ceramic jars, sealed them, and stored them like medicine, because that is what it was. She rubbed goose fat into leather boots, working it into every seam until the leather darkened and turned supple and completely waterproof. She rubbed it onto the children's chests when they were ill, as an alternative to camphorated oil. She rubbed it onto exposed skin, cheeks, ears, hands before sending the children out into biting wind, creating an insulating barrier against the cold that fishermen along the East Coast and channel swimmers used for exactly the same reason. A single goose produced enough fat to waterproof every boot in the house and treat every cold for the entire winter. When synthetic sprays arrived in the 1960s, goose fat disappeared from most kitchens. It is now sold in outdoor adventure shops for £6 a tin. Your grandmother got it for free from the Christmas dinner. Number 12. Newspaper body insulation. When outdoor work demanded hours in bitter cold, your grandfather slid sheets of newspaper between his shirt and his jacket flat against his chest and back. The paper created an insulating layer that trapped body heat against the torso and blocked wind from penetrating thin work clothes. Postmen, cyclists, farm workers, and builders across Britain did this routinely through the 1940s and 50s. A single sheet of broadsheet across the chest and back made the difference between shivering and coping. The paper rustled when you moved. Colleagues knew the sound. Nobody mocked it, because everyone did it. Marathon runners are handed foil blankets at the finish line, on exactly the same principle today. Your grandfather used the Daily Telegraph, and it did the same job for nothing. Number 11. Banking the fire. This was the single most important survival skill in any coal-heated home, and the one that has been most completely forgotten. Banking the fire at night meant your grandmother raked the hot coals together into a tight mound, covered them with a thick layer of coal dust or slacked the fine, almost powdery waste coal that cost a fraction of the lump stuff, and closed down the damper until only the faintest glow remained beneath the dust. The fire would smolder through the entire night at minimum burn, keeping the room above freezing and the chimney warm enough to restart easily at dawn. Done properly, the fire never went completely out from October to March. 5 months. One continuous fire. The skill was precise. Too much slack, and the fire suffocated dead by midnight, the house freezing by 2 in the morning. Too little, and it burned through the slack by 10 o'clock, eating into the good coal and wasting fuel the family could not afford to replace. Your grandmother could judge the exact amount by instinct, tamping and raking until the glow settled just right beneath the gray dust. 100 weight of coal slack cost about a shilling. The whole technique was about economy, keeping warmth alive through the darkest hours without wasting a single lump of fuel that was not absolutely necessary. When gas central heating arrived, the art of banking a fire vanished within a single generation. Nobody taught it because nobody thought anyone would ever need it again. Now here is where this story turns. Here is the part that nobody, not the reference video, not the nostalgia accounts, not the social media posts about what our grandparents knew ever explains. And it changes everything. Every secret on this list, the newspaper insulation, the chimney balloon, the blackout curtains, the draft excluders, the banked fire, the warming shelf, the overnight porridge, the bed bricks, the layered clothing, the goose fat, the mustard baths, none of these were isolated tips. Your grandmother did not pick and choose from a list. She did not try one this week and another next week like someone browsing a lifestyle blog. She ran all of them simultaneously, every single day, from October to March, as a single integrated system. Think about what that means. The chimney balloon stopped cold air entering through unused fireplaces. The newspaper insulation stopped cold penetrating through the walls. The blackout curtains trapped heat at the windows. The draft excluders sealed the doors. Inside that sealed envelope, the banked fire maintained a baseline temperature all night. The warming shelf used residual heat to dry tomorrow's clothes. The overnight porridge used residual heat to cook tomorrow's breakfast. The bed bricks transferred stored heat from the fire to the beds. The goose fat protected the body when it went outside. The mustard bath restored it when it came back in. The remedies, the bread poultice, the camphorated oil, the onion syrup, the elderberry treated whatever illness the cold managed to cause despite everything else. It was not 25 separate tricks. It was one system with 25 components. Remove any piece and the others had to work harder. Remove too many and the system failed. Your grandmother understood this instinctively, even though she never drew a diagram or used the word system in her life. She understood that warmth in a coal-heated house was not a setting you selected. It was a practice you maintained, hour by hour, day by day, through the entire winter. And here is what the modern world missed when it replaced all of this with a thermostat. It did not just replace the methods. It replaced the knowledge. It replaced the competence. It replaced the understanding that keeping warm is an active skill, not a passive service. We turned it into something that happens to us instead of something we do. And the first time the system fails, the first power cut, the first gas shortage, the first week when the boiler breaks down on a Friday night, and the engineer cannot come until Monday, we discover that we have forgotten everything. That is not nostalgia. That is a warning. But let me tell you a story that gives me hope. Because there is one place in Britain where the old knowledge did not quite die. In 2010, a village called Nenthead in Cumbria, one of the highest villages in England, sitting at over 450 meters above sea level in the North Pennines, was hit by severe flooding, followed by heavy snow and a prolonged power cut that lasted, in some houses, for nearly a week. Nenthead is remote. The roads were blocked. The mobile phone mast went down. For all practical purposes, the village was cut off from the 21st century. What happened next became a minor legend in the local press, though it barely reached the national papers. A retired miner named Douglas Peart, who was 83 years old and had lived in Nenthead his entire life, walked to the village hall on the first morning of the power cut and started a fire in the old hearth that had not been used in 15 years. He banked it that night using a technique he said his mother had taught him in 1939. He showed two younger men, both in their 50s, both entirely unfamiliar with coal fires, how to keep it alive. That fire burned continuously for 6 days. His wife, Mary, organized the women of the village into a cooking and supply chain. They pooled food. They heated water on camping stoves and on the hearth. They moved elderly residents who lived alone into the homes of younger families. They checked on every house twice a day, the same system Edith Bransby's terrace used in 1947, 63 years earlier. A local farmer named Tom Walton slaughtered a sheep and brought it to the village hall. Someone else brought potatoes from a root clamp. A woman whose name I could not find brought 6 jars of elderberry syrup she had made that autumn and distributed tablespoons to anyone with a cough. When the power came back on and the roads were cleared, a reporter asked Douglas Peart how the village had managed so well. He said something that has stayed with me since I first read it. He said, "We did not manage. We just remembered." There is a postscript to this story that I only discovered last week, and it connects everything back to where we started. In 2023, a primary school in County Durham introduced a program called Winter Skills into its Year 5 curriculum. The children spend 6 sessions learning how to bank a fire, how to make draft excluders from old fabric, how to make elderberry syrup, how to insulate a room with layered materials, and how to check on elderly neighbors during cold weather. The program was designed by a retired teacher whose grandmother survived the winter of 1947 in a pit village outside Bishop Auckland. The first generation to grow up without this knowledge is now, very quietly, beginning to teach it to the next one. Not out of nostalgia, out of necessity, because the winters are getting harder again. Energy is getting more expensive, and the thermostat, that little plastic box on the wall that was supposed to solve everything, turns out to need electricity, and gas, and money, and a boiler that works, and an engineer who can come. and a system that does not fail. And your grandmother's methods needed none of those things. She needed newspaper. She needed a brick. She needed goose, fat, and mustard powder, and a bag of oats, and the knowledge of how to keep a fire alive through the night. She needed competence, and competence does not require a power supply. 5 o'clock arrives on a January evening in Britain. The temperature drops. The wind picks up. The windows turn black. Somewhere, in a house with central heating and double glazing and a smart meter on the wall, someone turns up the thermostat and does not think about it twice. And somewhere else in a village in Cumbria, in a school hall in Durham, in the memory of everyone watching this who can still smell camphor oil and hear newspaper rustling behind the wardrobe and feel the slow warmth of a clay brick wrapped in flannel at the foot of the bed, the old knowledge is alive. Not because we wrote it down. We never did. But because the people who carried it, women like Edith Bransby, men like Douglas Peart, and 10 million grandmothers who never made the papers and never thought what they did was remarkable, passed it forward through a chain of hands and voices and kitchen tables that stretches back further than anyone can remember. The question is whether we are smart enough to listen before the last person who remembers is gone. What is the one winter trick from your grandparents that you still use today? Tell me in the comments. Tell me the trick, the town, and who taught you. Because those stories, your stories, are the only archive that matters now. And if you want to keep uncovering the knowledge that Britain forgot, the skills, the stories, and the people nobody else is talking about, subscribe. I have a video coming about the lost home remedies of the British medicine cupboard that I think you are going to love. Speaking of things our grandparents knew about health, have you ever wondered why every grandmother in Britain kept a bottle of something mysterious in the bathroom cabinet? Because what I found in that bottle will surprise you.